Hi, everybody. My name is Ezene Asser, and I'm the host of the HS podcast series. Today, I'm very excited. As you can see, we have an in-person recording. Really appreciate what David is building today. We're here to talk about, what he's building for healthcare. I used to tell my friends that what David is building is like the next $1 billion industry. I was doing a research and I found out that your industry is about for $3 billion in the African market. And for a young person who is that audacious to do something in this space, I am very, very excited to have you. So today on the Market and Startup Spotlight series, I have the privilege to introduce to you David Chen, of Kapsule Tech. So, David, would like to know more about you. Who is David Chen in general? Who are you?
So you said something about being audacious.
Yes.
I also think a little bit crazy. I think you have to be a bit crazy to be a founder. But to introduce myself, I'm David Chen. I'm one of the co-founders of Kapsule. I'll give you the Kapsule spiel very quickly. We are a leading health data aggregating company in Africa. So we combine data from a mixture of hospitals, insurers, pharmacies, and digital health platforms, currently across 16 countries.
Wow.
Yeah, for over 17,000 health facilities. And that gives us a data set of over 70 million health records across our network.
I actually underestimated what you're building. I actually thought it was just 9 countries, but now you said 16 countries. Wow,
Yeah.
we need to...
We need to update our materials.
Oh my God.
We're waiting for our next big milestone so that we can just do a big...
But how long have you been building Kapsule Tech, though?
That's a complicated question. So technically from 2020, as COVID shut down the world, I was in a very lucky position where my previous company I was working for was recently acquired by private equity. I had a lot of money and the world is closing down. So any way to start a business, it's when the world is shut and I can't spend my money anywhere. That was it. But prior to COVID, I had been working on Kapsule as an idea, like 7 days a week for about 2 years.
Wow. Literally, you're very hard working. I was just telling myself that I am working really hard, but just even hearing what you're saying about working 7 days a week, I think that's a big deal. And, like you said, I think you're working in a very, very unique space and a space that a lot of people have not really ventured into. So I'm curious to know what even made you think about that space in the first place.
So the first 2 years when we were kind of exploring the space, it was in parallel to my day job. And it became like an obsession. So I do my 9 to 6 and then I do my 6 to 10.
Wow.
And then I'll go to bed around midnight. And yeah, I think first it was really to understand the space because there was a premise that we were working off of that we needed to prove was true. So to kind of go into my personal background, I was in consulting where I was supporting pharmaceutical companies for a few years. And that's where I first heard about the reasons why they were underinvesting in African markets. And it was mainly to do with that there was a lack of data. I'd hear that for several years, nothing really changed. And then eventually I ended up moving to Axiom, a legal technology company that helped big businesses, Fortune 500 companies to adopt technology in their legal practice. I went from healthcare, very tightly regulated, slow-moving industry, to the legal space where you have equally slow-moving, regulated, like tough industry. And I got to see how people adopt technology in that context. Anywho, going back to my original question, or your original question, when I was starting Kapsule, well, I had an idea that if we had the data that the companies needed, they would then start investing more seriously into Africa. But in order to do that, you have to prove that idea. That 2 years was us going through all of the reports, meeting people, pitching to different pharmaceutical companies and speaking to different people just to find out, is there a there? Like, if we had to really figure out, is there something behind that intuition? That was the 2 years. And then, like I said, 7 days a week. And
the life of a founder.
Yeah, COVID happened. And then I just thought, I remember I had the thought where I said, I could do what I know most people are doing, where they're working from home and then like living life, or I can actually use all this time. And then I thought to myself, and again, this is sort of the risk management you do as a founder. I thought, if I quit, try really hard, and then by the time the world opens up again, it's failed, I could just say, oh, I lost my job due to COVID.
Okay, that's
Brush it under the rug. So that was my reason for the timing.
Wow. You said a lot. I feel like this is a masterclass. I wish I would like to invite maybe another time to like to our early stage founders, because I feel like this is also something that a lot of people don't know, risk management, and you were
Yeah.
able to calculate that. But also the fact that you gave 2 years to actually validating this in it in this idea, and that shows that you actually did the homework to really see. And I actually think that data, a lot of people say there's a lot of data in Africa, but I don't think that's true. What's your take on that?
I'd say there's a lot more data in Africa than people expect. I contrast it with, say, developed countries. So this is going to surprise you. If you take like Ireland, it's say where the headquarters of Facebook Europe is, Google, and all the big tech is headquartered in Ireland. So a developed nation.
Yeah.
I think they have across the entire country maybe 35,000 digital health records. Everything else is on paper. So if I contrast that with, say, Rwanda, where it's around 98% of the health facilities have been digitized, who doesn't have data?
That's true.
So, your question, does Africa have data? Yes. The problem is it's not very organized and it's not easily accessible. So I think that's the problem we identified, and that's what we tried to solve with Kapsule, is that we saw the data exists, it's just in pockets and silos all over the place. And what you need as a big company is all that information in one easy place so you can answer a question very quickly. So that's what made us shift from the data business we originally started, which was slightly different. It was on supply chain monitoring data, to aggregating data from many different hospitals.
Wow.
And then that led to including insurers and pharmacies and all this other.
Wow. For someone who has done this for 6 years, I'm just very, very proud of what you've achieved, to scale to 16 countries, having over, did you say 17,000?
Health facilities?
17,000 health. Wow. That must have been a lot of work.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's funny, it's a lot of work, but the beginning bit was the hardest. Actually figuring out that there is a there.
There is something there.
A way of solving a solution at scale that we can repeat. So the story of how we first started aggregating data was actually super interesting. So we started off monitoring supply chain data, and then we realized very quickly that there's no money in supply chain. Because if you increase the cost of distributing products, that increases the end price of the product. No one wants to spend money on
cost,
any cost that is in the supply chain. So we then was like, okay, we need to pivot the business. We then looked into building our own software to collect the data. We built an ERP, EHR, electronic health record system. We then had to go through the challenge of getting users. So we went to different facilities in Rwanda, in Uganda, started pitching our software. And then we encountered two issues. One, they hadn't digitized at all. Or two, they had digitized, but they're already using another system, which they may not like, but they're like, I'm already using this. We started selling our things. For the ones who hadn't digitized before, we literally spent, I think, a month trying to chase down $100 invoice.
Wow.
One facility that used our software, and we were just like, I'm never going to be a billionaire chasing $100.
Yeah.
We need to change this. And then with the ones who had already signed up with a vendor, the vendor that they're with doesn't want you to move over to another one. So they make it very hard to move their data across. So then our team had to reverse engineer how all these different software built themselves so that we can get the data out, migrate it to us, and then they can continue using us.
Wow.
After doing that a few times, our CTO is like, do you know what's pretty interesting? Regardless of the software they're using, the information they're collecting is basically the same information. Like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And then he comes back a couple of days later. He's like, oh, I thought I'd try something. It's pretty cool. I was like, okay, let me see. He's like, oh, these 5 hospitals, I've just turned them into one super hospital. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, because the information in them is basically the same, I just change all their formats into another format, and then I combined all of those formats into one. So now there's one super hospital can see across the 5. And I was like, okay.
That's really smart. Yeah.
And then I said to him, how scalable is this? And he says, well, any hospital that's using the same software, we can potentially add to this. So then I said to him, okay, so you're telling me if each of these 5 systems had 100 hospitals each, now we'd be able to get 500 hospitals in the super hospital?
Wow.
And then he goes, yeah, more or less the same. Yeah, more or less.
That's very smart.
Then I was like,
That's actually
guys,
very smart.
changing the business.
You
We are pivoting to this.
You guys are literally becoming billionaires because I feel like having data for like over 17,000 facilities, it's actually data is now the new oil, like they say.
I,
Or what do you think
I'm
about
going to
that?
come back to
Okay.
that thought because
Mm-hmm.
while I used to agree with it, I've evolved it a little bit over
Mm.
time. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, what we saw is that, okay, there's a way of getting data at scale, which you
Mm.
can then start answering questions from, which is the
Mm-hmm.
ingredient that we were looking for
Yeah.
to solve the problems that we were hearing from
Mm-hmm.
pharmaceutical companies. So if I was to summarize that whole early arc, I'd say, of our lives, it
Mm.
was finding out what the problem is from the customer, with the
Yeah.
customer being a large company. And then we were doing loads of mini experiments to figure out, okay, which approach will address this problem that
Mm.
we only have to figure out how to do it once, and then
Mm-hmm.
we run the machine again, and then it can continually answer the
The
question
question.
or address the need
Mm.
of this one
Mm.
customer type. And then I think once we found that, that's when we was like, okay, time to go
Mm. Hard.
to go hard to supercharge it. But yeah, and then that's kind of what led
That's been a journey, actually. Just saying this in few words, but I'm sure it has been a long journey. You guys sitting down, thinking, rethinking. I love what you said about reiterating, finding where there was no business in that idea. Initial one of analyzing supply chain data, and then you guys had to pivot. I think that's really smart because I feel like a lot of founders get stuck that, oh, this is a problem, but if you're not making money from it, it's 100, like you said, this is $100 bill. To become a $1 billion company, that's actually not smart. But you guys have really been able to do this, and I'm really, really impressed. I'm happy to know you. Thank God I know better. Thank God I know you, because this is actually a big business you've done. Well, I'm very curious. I think I already asked you this question off camera, but you're not
Mhm.
African. Why did you choose to why did you choose to come to Africa to build? And what
Yeah.
made you? Was it a job that gave you insight, or what exactly made you build in Africa?
So there is something many people in the startup space have heard of product
Mm.
market fit. There's something that Naval Ravikant mentions, where
I love
it's
him.
product market founder fit. Just to go into a little bit of who I am from a personal aspect, more it will tell you how these small ingredients added to me being the right person to do this business.
Mm-hmm.
So I was raised in a household which is like multi-ethnic, multiracial. I have Chinese heritage, I have Indian heritage, from the Caribbean, and
Oh,
also
that's cool.
from my great grandfather is from Nigeria.
Wow.
It was all of these
You have all the genes.
all of these different cultures somehow blended into a family mix. Now, my parents, they met in London. My mother was born in the Caribbean, and so on. Now, in our home, our father was like the biggest Pan-Africanist. He believed like the idea of the African Union. He wanted to have a United States of Africa. That's like what he. So throughout our childhood and education, he would just be talking about this a lot, which is funny because he was half Chinese himself, but there was something about the Pan-African message that really resonated.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the interest I had. Then fast forward when I end up in consulting. Of course, I'm one of the only Black people and things like that. When I was doing projects that were global in nature, and then there were things that were being said about the African market or developing markets, lower middle income countries, LMICs, whatever the term is, I would always be curious and ask a bit more questions about the African market. And then it was actually, I went to the World Brand Safety and Anti-Counterfeiting Summit. And there was a guy who was, I think he was from Cote d'Ivoire, but he had spent time documenting how medicines were being distributed across many different countries across Africa. And when I saw the level of shock of the other audiences, even though they were the global head of product,
of their companies,
like, wait, hold on, you're global head.
You have no idea
how Africa works on the ground. So I was just like, oh, so they don't know either. When I'm hearing in meetings that Africa is going to be significant at some point in the future, the growing population, growing middle class, all of these things, I just realized that there's nothing's going to change to make them actually act if someone reporting on what's happening on the ground
has no idea.
The person who's in theory in charge of it on a global level. So then there was that component. And then after working in Axiom and seeing how the technology can be adopted by large companies, that then showed me the blueprint of this is how you get big, slow companies to adopt technology. So then I was just like, okay, I have like an inbuilt personal mission to help improve the African continent. I've had exposure to the African continent as well as the customers as well, and how they think and how often blind they could be to the African context. And then now I've seen how to take them on a journey from no innovation to some innovation. So those three pieces together, I was like, okay, I can put them together. And that's where I ended up pursuing that. And then I think one of the realities that every founder has to face is that when investors are backing you, they're backing you as a person. So you need to figure out how are you as a individual uniquely positioned to have an outsized advantage over everyone else in the market. And one thing about me is that I am very, very comfortable being in completely different cultural contexts. And it was something that my previous company had realized. They had sent me to Germany, to Switzerland, to Hong Kong, and all these things, because they realized, regardless of the room you stick me in,
you're going to fit there.
I will become friends.
They're coming on. Yes, I love it.
I will be able to come with some form of business relationship, and you throw me anywhere. So when you take all those ingredients together, when I'm communicating with the investors and they say, this guy, he's managed to have a little bit of a weird career, then funny enough, most investors are like risky people by nature. They love, like, they could have gone into investment banking or consulting and done that their whole lives as well. They also have that little bit of, I like oddballs, I like weirdos, I like people who are a little bit different. So meeting them with all of those things combined then allowed us to get the resources, and then once you have the resources, you can get the team.
So I think what you've said is really, really very, very important, because I feel like your multicultural background has kind of played a role, because now you have a way of thinking differently than anybody, because some of us who are primed from Africa, we think that, oh, this is the way things should run. But because of that multicultural, it actually helped. But you said something that I found very, very interesting, and is the fact that, you also had that exposure and made you realize that this is a gap. I think people don't know, but one of the reasons why I started my podcast was because I worked on the global market access team. And, I was supporting 100. And I can tell you for free that nobody really knew a lot about the markets in Africa, because their products were not in those markets. Very little of their product were registered in some countries in Africa, like South Africa, because it's very developed. And I found it very, very sad to hear that a lot of global organizations do not even have understanding of local realities in the continent. And that was sort of why I started my podcast. That's just the truth. And it has evolved and made me really curious to learn. I'm on a mission to actually spotlight 297 global market, because I want to be an expert in global market. And that's why I try to engage with guests who are from different countries to really understand the market. What you just said about, making sure that we have a voice in the room and making sure that people really understand what the market is about and that's what your business is doing. I think that's really phenomenal.
Yeah, and funny enough, I will probably talk to you more about this off camera, because
sure.
There's a lot of information there. But like, we've seen situations where even just making people visible. So the assumption is there's no one here in these countries with this disease, especially if it's a rare disease, and they don't have the money to pay for it. But then if you have the data to say, oh no, there is a captive audience in this location who have the disease that you have, and they have the capital long term to be able to pay for it, that then changes how the people in the boardrooms or in these different offices think about prioritizing one country over another. So that is a huge part. And I think what we're realizing with Kapsule, and this goes to one of the earlier points that you mentioned about data being the next oil, is...
I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Crude oil isn't very useful by itself. And I find data is exactly the same. In that you can't take crude oil out of the ground, you can't make roads out of it, you can't make plastic, you can't fuel your car, you can't fuel your jet. You need to refine it first, and then you have all of the different uses that you can find from crude oil. Data is almost the same, and that's what we realized, is that you need to, yes, we can get all of this information, but not all of it will be relevant to everyone all the time, because they're not going to pay for all of that. So you need to be able to extract the value from the data and then give it to the right person who knows what to do with it. But then like I mentioned earlier, my thinking has evolved a little bit, and this is more around the business model of health data, I think it needs to be more of a utility than a commodity. So I'll explain why. So oil as a commodity is priced globally. We can see it at the moment. It's April of 2026, and we're all seeing oil crisis in the Middle East. The reason why that's an issue is because oil is priced globally. So that means if you buy it from Qatar, or you buy it from Nigeria, or you buy it from
it's the same price.
Venezuela through the US controls, it's the same price. It's a commodity. However, with a commodity like that, you need it to be very, very tightly regulated and tightly controlled who has access to it. Because if we control who has access, we can drive and control the prices. And that's how data has been treated traditionally in businesses. You control as much data as you can, you release little bits, and then you have the highest possible price that you can charge for it. Now, there is something in economics called the Jevons paradox, and that's something that really changed my way of thinking, and also about the business model of Kapsule as well, in that there is a strange thing that happens when you reduce the price of certain things as much as possible. So the best example is electricity. When electricity is super expensive, only wealthy people have it as a light bulb in their house as a party trick, like 100 years ago. However, once you make electricity super cheap, you can have everything from air conditionings, TV, to printers, to all these things that run on electricity. That's only possible when you have cheap electricity. So what ends up happening is, in the first instance, when it's super expensive, people spend as little as they can on that price, on that commodity. So it may have 0.01% of a million people's net spend, because it can be adopted by large companies. That then showed me the blueprint of this is how you get big, slow companies to adopt technology. So then I was just like, okay, I have like an inbuilt personal mission to help improve the African. Only have a 1 million people user base. It can have a billion or 3 billion people who are purchasing electricity. Not only that, they're not spending 0.01% of their income. They're spending 1%, 5%, 10%, depending on what they're using. Even now, in the case of AI, I think close to 50% of their cost is the electricity to actually keep the data centers running. So it really changes and evolves based on ease of use, ease of access, and the ability to scale up. So I say all of that to go back to my point. What I believe with health data is that you can turn it into a commodity, not a utility. When it's a commodity, when it's a utility, then you're incentivizing people to use it more. So if we can make data super usable and accessible, you can use the data for a bunch of different innovative use cases. You can find new creative value that you can get out of it, and then your overall consumption of it will go up. So we've gone from trying to create a giant castle with a lot of data inside and then charge for entrance and exit, to now wanting to create a utility company that can plug a health data.
I really love the way you describe the commodity and the utility. I think I've never really thought about it that way. I think there's something about, what you described using the electricity model. And, what I'm also thinking about in the light that, okay, what if we have a lot of people now have access to this data? What will now be the value? Like, what would be the premium of having this data when that becomes?
So what's super exciting about it is that we never really can know how many things people can innovate on top of it. Like, the internet, when it first started, was just a network in which you can have a researcher in one university message directly a researcher in another university. And then the internet has become what it is today. It's once you connect people or thought or data or things together in a way where information can flow both ways, it's almost infinite amount of use cases. So funny enough, I was talking to my co-founders about this, and we were like, okay, let's imagine like we're super successful with Kapsule. Our current vision that we sell to investors is we're trying to build the Bloomberg terminal of health data. So,
wow, that's a billionaire idea. Come on.
So you can have one place, you go in, you log in, and any health data question you have, whether it's what's the market share of this product, or what is the price of this product, or what drugs work best in which population, all of that, we want you to be able to answer it very quickly in our platform. But then we were just thinking, what else could be enabled on top of that. And another thing that we were just talking about is how healthcare is very reactionary to something going wrong. You're like, if we could use it for ourselves, what we would then do is create a full chain. So from where you're procuring your food to your wearables that are monitoring your health, through to labs that you're able to do, to your gym membership, to your overall healthcare when you do get sick. We would want to have that entire linked and interconnected, and then be able to report on ourselves as well as comparing us to people like us elsewhere in the world. That's what we would do. So it's like all of those things become possible once you do the hard work of bringing it all together in one place.
Wow.
So that's kind of where I see Kapsule's role, is we are the ones really pushing to make, or like build the pipelines or the connectors that are able to pull in the data and then distribute it to where it's being requested. And then once people have it on their fingertips, then human creativity will come out and there will be a whole bunch of new applications.
Oh my God. Wow. I'm just thinking about the whole ecosystem you're trying to tap into. And I'm like, this guy is about to become a billionaire, guys. Watch out. Anyway, because when you said that Bloomberg, I was like, that's a really smart idea. And I know you can achieve it. And I pray you achieve it. But I'm also going to ask you this question about, people talk about the myth of data, right? Data use cases, because you said something about people having data but not knowing what to do with the data, right? I think that's also a problem that we've identified in the continent, that some people say, oh, there's no data problem. Just people don't know what to do, because at the end of the day, once you bring out an insight from it, people don't act on it. What's your take on that? And how do you think that will evolve over time with AI and all of these models coming up?
Yeah, so AI has been almost a godsend in many respects, especially for the health programs I've been running in Africa. Like there's a huge opportunity there today where if I wasn't doing what I was doing with Kapsule, I'd be going around to find all of the different donor programs that have been reporting data for decades, almost 30 years of data that just goes into an archive somewhere. Like AI can now take all of that from everywhere and
make sense of it
and pull insights. But that aside, I think the problem of people not knowing what to do with the data is they don't actually understand the economics of data, if you will. The economics of how data is used. Now, the unfortunate thing of the data business of the past, of say the Googles, the Facebooks, etc., the challenge that they ended up revealing is how individuals can be exploited without their knowledge, and that's why all of the data protection laws and all those things came in. But I think if you take one step before that, you need to understand the economics of how their business works, before you then think, okay, this is how I'll use the data, etc. Now, what both Google, particularly Facebook actually, what Facebook learned particularly well is that people need information about other people to know what to sell them, or to know who to sell to. How can I get the best ROI for each marketing dollar? Now, Facebook was able to do that by monitoring everything that everyone's done, and then being able to say, okay, this is your profile of the type of person you are. I can get 1 million of these, and they will likely buy the same thing. And that's how they built their business. And I think with Kapsule, a lot of the time the commercials behind the desire for data is very similar. And I always say it falls into two categories. People either want to buy something, or people either want to sell something, or they want to research something. And if they want to research something, it's usually so that they can sell something. So when you have that in mind, you then have to think, what questions need to be asked in order to help someone research or to sell? And then once you understand that, then you can actually start applying a price to it. Now, I think in the case of data collection in Africa, the problem is you have it almost in reverse. So in a normal transaction, you would have someone, I have a problem to solve, I will pay you to solve the problem. But in Africa, because of how the donor economy works, or the funding or the aid economy has worked,
it's prescribed.
It's prescribed. So they're saying, I will give you money to do this.
Answer this question.
Now, they have their own reason for wanting to track that information, but that doesn't necessarily align with the need to sell something or to research something in a way that can lead to commercial activity. So it will always be a one-time thing. Like the difference between a health program and someone seeking like holistic healthcare is like with a health program, when it's done, it's complete. Work is done. You don't need to do anything else. With a human, it's always continuous.
Yes.
You may have a broken foot one day, or a sore throat the next, or a headache the next. Like, your needs will always evolve.
Change.
And the way the healthcare system ideally should be set up is in a way so that whenever any of those needs come up, you can then address it as they come up, and in the frequency, or you can get the resources so that it's proportional to the frequency in which the problem will
arise.
Whereas the way that things have been done traditionally is that you build all this infrastructure, you run a program, the program has a specific goal, you hit the goal, and then it's done.
That's all, and you can't even change it. I think that's the problem that we had. We actually really need to redefine healthcare in Africa, because I feel like that prescription is not really helping matter, because like you said, you have to reiterate as a result of, you set out to set an objective for supply chain, but oftentimes with donor programs, you don't have that flexibility to pivot or to make those changes. And I think that's where we are missing it. But definitely, I think that, we need to really think about that data use. I had the opportunity to implement a program where we had to digitize pharmacies across, Nigeria. And I had this data sitting on my lap, and I was like, okay, aside from just presenting the data to government officials and, trying to develop strategies out of the insight I got from the data, I was always thinking about what more can I do with this data? What more can we do? I think there's a lot of data sitting for decades, right?
Yep.
That AI and, machine learning and probably what you're already doing can actually help to really, really do like a forecast or a, prospective study to say, okay, this is what has not worked based on this data. These are things we need to implement. That's why I'm very excited about what you're doing. And I think you're about to become a billionaire, though. I keep saying that. Anyway, yeah, definitely. This has been very insightful. And I really love the way the conversation has gone around data. So I'm very curious. Kapsule Tech has been doing this for 6 years. I'm sure I listened to some of your previous recordings where you talk about your team. How did you meet them? How did you, because you said you started working on this 7 days a week, 24 hours. I'm like, oh, how were you able to, because I feel like you're a phenomenal leader, to be able to governate these and do this in 16 countries. What would you say was your secret sauce in building?
Yeah, I'd say if I was blessed with anything, it was discernment of good friends. Ever since, I'm still close friends with pretty much every friend I've had since childhood.
Wow.
So I think that's been a huge advantage for me. And when it comes to my co-founder, I've known him since I was 4 years old. Wow. We literally used to get picked on by the same bully in the playground.
That bully will regret his life.
Yeah, Paul, if you're out there.
Oh, mind you, he's not a billionaire.
Yeah, we were in primary school. He used to make us cry every day.
Oh my God, Paul.
We went through all things. The UK signed a deal with the Rwandan government. Whose plan was to send all of their legal immigrants. So you had people thinking about the genocide, and then people thinking that's the place where we send the migrants. Like, why?
That's crazy. That's actually very crazy. But actually, people said something that opportunities come like a water wave and something like that. You jump into it and you never know where it takes you. And I think that's what you did. I've had that situation in my own personal journey where I had to move, and even my movement in Rwanda was just a move of faith, and it actually worked out to my benefit. So we're about to wrap up this podcast, but I'm curious to learn, if you could do something else differently, what would you have done?
This is something that I have. It's probably going to surprise you. This is something that I've spent probably 50 plus hours thinking about.
Oh, wow.
As founders, you always think, if I wasn't solving this problem, this is another problem I'd solve. Roads.
Okay. How does road got to do with data? That's actually...
Yeah. So if I wasn't doing data, I'd be doing roads, because it's the choke point of everything. And when we think about intra-African trade, we think about movement of people, we think about everything, it's at the wrong roads. The roads are a lot of Africa's growth, I believe, where, for instance, you have some innovations which can turn plastic waste into roads, or it can turn other materials into roads. I've spent an obscene amount of time looking into material science and things like that, just for roads.
That's very unique. I love it. That's actually very unique. I wasn't expecting that, but yeah, definitely. I think that infrastructure in Africa, no, I don't even think just Africa, even because everywhere the roads are bad, And I think, that's very unique. I never expected that from a founder who's tackling $1 billion, data lack of data industries. But that's
Funnily enough, I feel like roads could be even bigger. So I'll geek out for a little bit. But
okay.
like, for instance, we're in the US. One of the things that they have here is motel. And like, I'm not sure if you've ever tried to travel between African countries by bus.
Sometimes between countries, not really.
I have, like, between Rwanda and Uganda and Nairobi. Just for an experience with the boys, let's say we did it. Never again. However, the experience told me there's so much opportunity where if you had good roads and then you had motels built alongside, it can actually be an incredible journey because some of the landscapes that you're going through and the different environments. If I had a nice way of traveling by road between these countries, I definitely would. So, yeah, that's kind of one of the
maybe that's your next big venture you're going to run after you finish building Kapsule Tech and laying down the ground for the next generation to take over.
If I end up being a billionaire, I think I'll end up probably doing an
construction.
put all my money into making roads.
That's really, really inspiring. Okay, so we have to wrap up in now quickly. So yeah, what lessons have you learned in your journey so far?
The biggest lesson for me in the last few years has been the importance of faith. And so I've had moments in my life where I was more or less agnostic. In my childhood, I was a lot more religious, but recently I've found faith again. And for me, it's that centering point where I don't believe if you're trying every day to do the best, you won't be rewarded and God will not abandon you. And this is something I say all the time where whenever I'm having a tough moment, I say to myself that God hasn't brought me this far just to abandon me now.
Absolutely.
So I'd say if I can tell anyone anything, it's particularly, in my case, finding Jesus Christ as a source of strength and a source of comfort has been incredible.
And I also have finding your wife too.
Only Jesus Christ could have found me her.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And yeah, just to wrap up, thank you so much. It has been an incredible session with you. And I'm sure there are days where you feel like I'm done and I'm tired. I don't think I want to do this ever again. Do you ever have that moment? And what's that quote? I always end my podcast with this. What's that quote that keeps you going whenever you feel like that? Like, why did I even start this? What keeps you going?
There's a quote, which is actually the Kapsule motto, is from Charles Bukowski, the poet. And the line is, if you're going to try, go all the way, otherwise don't even start.
Yourself and what's her name? She also said the same thing. Like, if I've got to do it, you've got to be the best in it. So.
Yeah, if you're going to try, go all the way. And it's a commitment to be like, you know what? And funny enough, it was also when I met my wife as well. It's that mentality where it's better to not do anything half-assed and to not half-effort it or whatever. If you're going to do it, commit for the duration, for the difficulty, for the good times, for the bad. And this is just part of the journey. You're not going to get the view at the top of a mountain without the climb. You just need to embrace it.
Wow, that's really, really inspiring. Well, we're about to wrap up the podcast. This has been a very insightful. I'm really, really glad to know you in person, first of all, because you're about to be the billionaire of the continent, because you are gathering data from 17,000 facilities and even trying to do more, 16 countries and over. How many patients you already have?
The official numbers is 70.
Wow. So guys, David here is about to be the next big thing in Africa's healthcare. He's building an infrastructure and also a system that galvanizes data from across the continents. And he's done this so well. I mean, David is a very audacious leader. He quit his high-paying consulting job, to pursue this foot. And like I said, he's in it for it and he's not going anywhere anytime soon. And I love that about you. And I'm really, really glad to meet you. Really, not just because of the podcast. I'm really glad to know you and to meet you and to know people who are actually moving the needle in the continent and not just talking about it. So so this is it. We've talked about the market in Rwanda and what Kapsule Tech is building. How can people meet you? Where do they find you?
I'm most active on LinkedIn, so you will find me there.
Are you raising fund anytime soon? Should the investors send you a message?
Yeah, fun fact, we've never done outbound fundraising. Beyond the very earliest days, all of our investment has been inbound.
Are you serious?
Yeah, which is a weird thing to say. So I actually don't have much experience of doing a typical fundraising, but we will be announcing some good things. Our plan is to do our Series A in the next few months.
Wow. That's actually very, 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 how would I call it, new to hear that you've not raised funds so far like that way, and you've been able to do this in 16 countries. Wow.
But it's because it's funny, we tried to fundraise the traditional way, but no one wanted to fund data.
But anyway, this is David. He's someone that I'm very glad to know is the next generation builder in Africa's healthcare. And today we've talked about what it means to build for healthcare in Rwanda and Africa, and what he's doing with Kapsule Tech in terms of building data infrastructure for healthcare in Africa is super relevant, particularly in this time where we have AI and machine learning. The continent is still trying to figure its way around that. I think you should always reach out to him, because he has data for 75 million people, and so we can make sense about how, particularly also in this time where we have limited resources because funding closes and all, we really need to make decisions better, right? And having data to make these decisions is the way to go. So yeah, thank you so much. This is the HSB podcast series, and today I am with David Chen, the African who is now African, the non-African who is now African, building for Africans and also trying to innovate for, the next generation. So thank you so much, David, and thank you to the audience. It was really my pleasure meeting you and also knowing you in person. Thank you. Cut.